Well, this isn't gonna get annoying. Hey guys, Wumbo here, and welcome to my very first game review on this channel. Now, in the past, I've done game reviews on some of my older channels, most notably Boomer Reviews. And that channel was, I made videos on that channel when I was in my sophomore and junior year of high school, and it clearly shows. These videos are still on YouTube to this day, and you guys can watch them if you would like. Just be warned, you're going to hear a lot of stuttering and a lot of misread lines. We play as Knuckles in single player. Why is this game shorter than Sonic 2? And why does the sound test show levels that aren't even in the game? Why? Why? Yeah, it's pretty cringy. Anyway, I figured I might as well take another go at this whole game review thingy, considering that I have a little bit better understanding of filming, writing, editing, and, well, games themselves. I have a gaming podcast called Gaming Etc. Podcast, where me and a friend of mine by the name of Colin Jeffrey, or Nostalginator, talk about video games almost every Sunday, and I figured we might as well take another go at it because I have a better understanding of how games work, or just talking about games in general. These videos will also help me with filming and editing. I'm going to school right now, my local community college, as a film major, so I figured, you know, these might help out with that, getting me more used with Adobe Premiere, and yeah, just these little film projects will keep me busy. Anyway, introductions aside, what am I talking about today? Well, I made a list of games that you guys can see on the screen right now, of a bunch of random games in my collection that I would like to consider reviewing. And I figured I might as well talk about a game that I'm familiar with, and that's a little bit simple to talk about. So, Sky Target. I'm pretty sure none of you guys have actually heard about this game, so let me give you a little bit of insight.
Sky Target was developed and published by Sega in the arcade in 1995 and ported to the Sega Saturn in 1997. It's said to be the pseudo-sequel to the Afterburner series, and looking at the games at a glance, you can easily see the resemblance. If you don't know, Afterburner was a game released in the arcade in 1987 and released on a plethora of home consoles at the time by Sega. It's essentially a game where you fly around in a jet and blow stuff up. I'm playing Afterburner 2 on a Genesis here, and honestly, it's still a pretty fun game. So I understand why there were a few sequels and why it's still remembered to this day. Now, in Sky Target, well, you do the exact same thing, but with 3D polygons instead of 16-bit scaling, blowing up enemies and huge bosses, which I can't even tell what the hell they are sometimes. Sky Target certainly has a lot in common with Afterburner.
But I'm getting a little bit ahead of myself. Let's look at the game's story.
Yes, I'm not shitting you, there's a legit story that it is explained in the game's manual, which, to summarize, Special Plane gets stolen by the enemy, which of course they never explain who the enemy is, and destroy it. The end! Okay, I know there's a couple cutscenes taking place in between levels, but you can hardly hear them, so they don't really amount to much for the game itself. Seriously, why do we need a 2-page introduction on a character that we never see in the game? Although, Daniel Blade sounds like a pretty cool name.
Alright, let's get into the meat of the game, the gameplay.
Like I said before, the game plays similar to Afterburner in the sense that you're a pilot, moving forward automatically, gunning down everything you see. But unlike Afterburner, you're not just destroying planes, but you're also destroying subs, boats, missile launchers, and the occasional tanks. Also, unlike Afterburner, there's no speed control, which can honestly be kind of annoying at some of the bosses, but I'll explain once we get to that. You have a choice of 4 different planes that don't really feel that different from one another. You have 2 different weapons in the game, the Vulcan gun and heat-seeking missiles. The Vulcan gun is essentially a machine gun that's kinda useless unless your missiles can't really lock onto something that's right in front of you, but most of the time you're going to be using the missiles, which you can lock onto the enemy with a cursor, and you tap the crap out of the C button. When you do, you hear fire, fire, fire. And it can get kind of annoying. But it is the most useful weapon in the game, so I can't really complain too much. At the end of each level, there's a boss, which is honestly pretty cool. Sure, the frame rate kinda shits the bed once it's on screen, but the slowdown actually makes the boss look more epic in a sense. All the boss battles really amount to is avoiding missiles and firing at special areas where the ship destroys. The only problem where I have with the boss battles is, well, the camera can kinda fuck you over. You can't really control the camera itself, it just goes wherever it feels like. Sometimes it directs you where you need to go, sometimes you can go ahead of the boss, sometimes you could go through the boss, and sometimes you could go in the exact opposite position of where you need to go. Yeah, it could get pretty annoying since every boss battle has a time limit, but if the boss gets away, it doesn't really matter since you're only getting points in the end of it. Like a lot of typical arcade games at the time, you're only really playing for points, and it doesn't really matter in the long run. I mean, unless you're really itching to get that high score. If I had to pick my favorite boss battle, it would have to be level 4's boss, just for how absurd it is. You're not only trying to blow up a missile piece by piece, but when you're at the top of the ship, there's freaking laser beams that will try to destroy your plane! How badass is that? One legitimate complaint where I do have the game is when there are so many missiles on the screen, it's hard to tell where they're coming from, so it could lead to a few cheap shots at your ship. Aside from a few times where the frame rate really slows down and the draw distance is kinda crap, I like how the game plays overall. It's very simple to pick up and play, so I can't really complain too much. Now time to get to the controls, which is honestly pretty simple. You have two shoot buttons, a camera button, which is extremely useful to see more level. Going up and down is reverse like any other playing game in existence. And that's about it. Playing the game with the D-pad is fine, but Sky Target is one of the few games where you can use the Sega Saturn 3D control pad. So I figured I might as well try it for the sake of the review. And my lord, it's way better than playing with the D-pad. For one, it's way more comfortable and way more precise to control you're playing with this controller. And secondly, the shoot buttons are set to where you can use the back buttons, or essentially the triggers, instead of using the front buttons, which I like a lot. It's up to personal preference. Playing the game with the D-pad isn't really that bad compared to playing with the 3D controller, but I would recommend playing it with a 3D controller. Presentation-wise, well, the presentation is pretty lackluster. There's only really two modes in the game: arcade mode, where the game plays like how it is in the arcade, and ranked mode, which is essentially a mode where you pick the levels that you want, and you unlock more if you continue playing. Aside from a few cutscenes and the options menu, they didn't really add too much to this port to stand out, but to be honest, that's not too big of a problem, as long as the gameplay is good anyways. The one thing that kind of bugs me though, is the amount of content that the game has, which, well, it really isn't that much. The game has about 12 different levels, which sounds nice, but it gets pretty repetitive over time. Since this is a port of an arcade game, there's very few variations on each playthrough thanks to splitting pathways. But overall, it's just some aesthetic changes and different bosses for each level, so it doesn't really change much in the gameplay department. So after playing the game a couple of times for the sake of the review, I can say that the game's content doesn't really change that much, but it's still pretty nice for what it is, and I would recommend playing the game in short doses since the game might feel a little bit repetitive. Going on to the graphics, it looks pretty decent for a Sega Saturn 3D title. I know the Saturn wasn't made for 3D to begin with, so for Sega Saturn standards, it's okay. Although the textures on ships are kind of muffled and pixely, and the boss models look kind of weird. I mean, I know that's a helicopter, it just looks kind of wrong. Oh well. Like I said before, the draw distance is kind of distracting, but this problem only really occurs in levels where there's a lot going on in the background, like in the desert level, for example. As for the frame rate, it can go down when there's a lot on screen, or whenever a boss first comes on screen. It's a little distracting, but compared to other games at the time, it's manageable. As for the music, it's mostly 90s rock music, which is pretty fitting for the game. Even though it fits with the game well, I honestly can't remember any songs from the game because it's pretty freaking forgettable. Actually, come to think of it, there's really one song that I can remember throughout the entire game, and it's absolutely terrible. There's a boss theme on the very first level, and it sounds like a man with a very high falsetto is screaming right in front of you, while at the same time there's a homeless man banging on garbage cans pretending to play the drums. It's annoying.
You know what? It actually kind of reminds me of this.
Hey, want to hear the most annoying sound in the world?
Yeah, that seems about right.
Overall, I would say that Sky Target is a pretty solid arcade experience for the Saturn. It has pretty simple controls and gameplay that's even simpler, but it actually works in playing for short bursts, of course. It can get repetitive though, and there's a lack of content in the game, so this isn't really a must-have for the Saturn. But if you like simple pick-up-to-play arcade games, and especially if you like Afterburner, then by all means give this game a shot. Right now though, the game is going for around $50 on eBay, so I do admit that the game's getting a little bit pricey. Even still, Saturn games have been going up in price, so I can't really complain too much.
Anyways, thank you guys for watching. If you guys have any suggestions to make these videos better, or if you guys want me to review a certain game in particular, please put it in the comment section below, and I might consider it in the future. Thank you for watching, everyone, and stay beautiful. Bye, everyone.